In a quiet mountain town in Colorado, there's a diner with only 8 tables, and one secret that no one ever talked about out loud. Every afternoon at 3:40, the same bowl of soup would appear on the same table. No name, no order, no customer. Just a silent ritual, played out day after day, without explanation. Until one winter morning, when 4 black military SUVs pulled up outside, and everything changed. On the edge of a quiet mountain town in Colorado, tucked off Route 19, sat a modest little diner with a faded wooden sign that read, Maggie's Kitchen. Every afternoon, when the fog began to kiss the windows and the scent of beef stew and slow-cooked barley began to fill the air, that diner became a resting place for those far from home. Long-haul truckers, lost travelers, and aging locals with nowhere left that felt like theirs. There were only 8 tables. The owner, a middle-aged woman named Maggie, didn't talk much about herself. People just knew she brewed strong coffee, remembered how each regular liked their eggs, and had a quiet gift for recognizing who needed a hot meal and who just needed a place to breathe. One afternoon in September, as the weather turned crisp and the clouds hung low like wool, the boy appeared. No one paid much attention. Just a small figure in a faded puffer jacket and a gray knit cap, the edges fraying. He walked in not exactly shy, but with the hesitancy of someone who'd already stood outside for a while before finally pushing the door open. The bell over the door jingled softly. He said nothing, didn't look around, just went straight to table 3 by the window, the one that always caught the last bit of afternoon sun. Maggie saw him. He sat down, pulled a worn-out book from his backpack and opened it without a word. It wasn't a children's book. The pages were yellowed, the print small and dense. The kind of book adults read when they want to disappear from the world for a while. When Maggie approached, the boy looked up, dark eyes, steady. Not the kind of alertness you expect from a child, but the kind you develop when you've had to stay watchful. "Can I get you something?" Maggie asked, gently, not too familiar, not pushy. The boy replied in a soft voice, "Just a glass of water, if that's okay." She nodded, said nothing more. From that day on, he came in every afternoon at exactly 3:45 p.m. Always sat at the same table, always ordered water, always read. He didn't eat, didn't play with a phone, didn't speak to anyone. Some days it rained, he still came, his jacket soaked, shoes muddy, but he never complained. He'd wipe off his book, sip his water, and read quietly, like all he needed in the world was a few minutes of stillness in the middle of a chaotic day. He had no name, no address, no one picked him up, but he showed up like clockwork, down to the minute, as if he was keeping some kind of ritual. And like any ritual, there were details that never changed. His backpack was always placed on the left side, zipper diagonally closed. His book was open to the same spot, marked by something flat and worn, maybe a postcard, maybe a photo. And when he leaned forward, the collar of his shirt would briefly reveal a sliver of metal, a dull silver tag strung on a plain black cord. It wasn't flashy, Maggie could tell. It wasn't jewelry. One evening, just before closing, Maggie was wiping down tables when something slipped out of the boy's forgotten book. A color photo. Edges worn, one corner smudged by time. On the back, faint ink marks. No name, no date. Just an adult holding a child tightly. The light in the photo obscured the adult's face, but the arms were locked around the boy like they never wanted to let go. Maggie picked it up, flipped it over, and was about to tuck it back into the book when the door swung open again. The boy stood there, breath catching. I forgot," he said quickly, lowering his head. His hand trembled slightly as he took the book back. Maggie didn't ask. She didn't smile either. She just placed a hand gently on the table, a quiet gesture that said more than words, "I'm still here." It wasn't until the 4th week that Maggie took a small step further. The air, that day, was colder than usual. A sharp breeze slipped through the cracks in the door, and the aroma of beef and barley soup simmering in the back was stronger than usual. Rich, comforting, as if it was calling out. The boy opened his book as always, settled in, and Maggie walked over, setting a steaming bowl of soup in front of him. No eye contact. "Cook made too much," she said flatly. "If you don't help me eat it, I'll have to throw it out." The boy looked up, lips pressed slightly together. His eyes searched Maggie's face, cautious, uncertain. But after just a few seconds, he gave a small nod. No thank you, no smile, just picked up the spoon. Maggie turned and walked back to the kitchen, not lingering. But from behind the counter, she kept an eye on him, watching the soup disappear slowly, one careful spoonful at a time, as if the boy was learning to trust something beyond himself. Everyone has a moment in the day they quietly look forward to, though most couldn't say why. For Maggie, that moment came around 3:40 p.m., when the last bit of sunlight slanted across table 3, and the little bell above the glass door might chime at any second. The boy kept coming, quietly, on time. Always took the same seat, set his backpack by his feet, opened his book in front of him like it was a shield against the world. At first, it all felt as soft and unnoticed as breathing. But some people began to take note. An older woman with silver hair, who usually sat by the window, leaned toward Maggie one afternoon and asked in a stage whisper, "Is that boy one of yours? If my grandson ate like that without paying, I'd tan his hide." Maggie just smiled gently. She neither confirmed nor denied. Not everything needs explaining, at least not to her. But not everyone appreciated the silence. One day, just after the boy had left, a man in a short-sleeved shirt, one of those fast-talking, loud-chewing types, glanced over at table 3 and muttered, "That one on the house too?" Maggie replied with a polite smile, "We made a little too much that day." The man gave a sarcastic nod and scoffed. "Maybe I'll come early tomorrow, sit in that same seat. See if I get lucky too." A dry chuckle came from another table. A woman in her 40s, hair dyed too bright, stirred her coffee and chimed in, "You're sweet, Maggie, but you know kindness only works if you're smart about it. Let people take advantage of it, and next thing you know, you're feeding the whole county." The boy didn't change much. Still quiet, still closed off. But little by little, when he handed back the empty bowl, his eyes lingered a second longer. Not just a glance of politeness, but something more. A touch of shyness, a flicker of gratitude, and, above all, the fragile beginning of trust. One chilly afternoon, the weather turned damp and raw. The wind slid through the doorframe, carrying the smell of wet pine and earth. That day, Maggie placed a neatly folded knit cap beside the soup bowl before the boy arrived. Dark green, soft, clean, not fancy, just warm. No tag, no note, just something she thought might help. The boy came in, sat down, glanced at the hat for a few seconds, then quietly tucked it into his backpack without a word. The next day, he wore it. Another afternoon, she added a little butter cookie shaped like a star. She'd baked him too long, its edges were a little burnt. He picked it up, turned it slowly in his hand. His eyes drifted somewhere far away. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, like the words had escaped before he meant to say them, "Looks like my dad's hat." Maggie looked up, about to speak, but instead, she just smiled. Maybe that's fate. She didn't ask questions. She knew some things vanish the moment you touch them too soon. Some customers got used to the boy's quiet routine. Some didn't. One man said flat out, "Maggie, you shouldn't expect people to repay kindness. That's not how the world works." She only smiled. To her, kindness with conditions isn't really kindness at all. It's a transaction, a contract, a favor disguised as generosity. And Maggie remembered, long ago, on a rainy afternoon much like this one, she was seasoning a pot of stew in the kitchen when her husband, a quiet man with wind-worn hands, said softly behind her, "True kindness doesn't expect a thank you. If it keeps someone going one more day, that's enough." She'd kept that line with her all these years, held it close like a second heartbeat. That Monday, the skies were gray. The cold had crept in, but the rain stayed away. It was the kind of stillness that made the whole town feel like it was holding its breath. Maggie still opened the diner on time. She made the soup like always, prepared a small butter cookie, placed it gently beside a neatly folded napkin in the shape of a triangle. Table 3 remained empty, but she still set the meal down, as if it had been etched into the very grain of the wood. 3:45 p.m. No sign of the boy. 4. She stood behind the counter, fingers tightening around the dish towel. 4:20. The little bell over the door never rang. That was the first day. Then came the second. The next afternoon she cooked again. This time it was chicken and rice soup, the kind Isaiah once finished down to the last drop and left behind a small drawing of a bird in flight. But the chair by the window remained empty. No one sat there. as if even the room had grown used to saving that spot for someone who didn't speak much. On the third day, the weak light of late autumn spilled through the window, casting a pale line across the empty chair. Maggie still placed the meal, still poured a warm glass of water, and still, no one came through that door. A regular sitting near the counter sipped his coffee, glanced toward table 3, and muttered like he was summing up a hard-learned lesson. Knew it. Feed a kid long enough and one day he disappears like he was never here. From the table beside him, a woman chimed in. "You're sweet, Maggie, but kindness like that, it turns into foolishness fast. No one even knows who that boy is." For all we know, Maggie didn't say a word. Her hands quietly gathered silverware from a nearby table. Her face didn't flinch, but her eyes lingered on the door, as if hoping to hear the bell ring just once more. Behind the counter, the dark green knit cap still hung on the hook, the one the boy had worn. The gift Maggie had left without a note. She hadn't put it away, hadn't washed it, just left it, as if keeping it there might somehow keep him close. On the fourth morning, while wiping down table 3 like she always did, Maggie noticed something. A small slip of paper wedged tightly between the slats of the wooden table. It was crumpled, the edges water-stained, as if someone had held it tightly, then let it go. She unfolded it. The handwriting was crooked, uneven, but still legible. "If I don't come back, I'm sorry. You were the only one who didn't ask who I was, and because of that, I could stay." Maggie folded the note slowly, tucked it into the inside pocket of her apron right over her heart. The way people carry things too sacred to speak of. Then she just stood there, staring at the empty table, as if she were quietly waiting for a small soul who had slipped away without a chance to say goodbye. Friday. Clear skies, a light wind. Maggie started the afternoon as usual. Opened the diner at the usual time, played the same old Patsy Cline record she'd been spinning for nearly a decade. In the kitchen she made one bowl of soup, a portion too much, on purpose. Table 3 was freshly wiped down. Napkin folded sharp, still waiting for someone who might never come back. She didn't expect anything anymore, but she still prepared. 3:43 p.m. She looked out the window, watched a few trucks pass, saw an old couple walking their dog. No familiar face. No small figure with a backpack. 0.345, the boy's usual time. Maggie let out a soft breath, then turned back toward the counter. And then, just as she was wiping down the countertop, a different sound rolled in from the parking lot. Not a bell, not a voice, but a sound that didn't belong. Heavy, slow, precise. Not the engine of a delivery van, not a customer's pickup, but something else entirely. 4 black SUVs pulled into the lot, gliding silently, one by one. No horns, no headlights flashing. They moved like a tide, measured, controlled, inevitable. Military plates, tinted windows. Inside the diner there were only 6 customers, 3 scattered tables, and all 6 turned toward the window at once. The Patsy Cline record playing in the background clicked off as someone behind the counter turned the knob without a word. Maggie stepped slowly toward the window, wiped her hands on her apron, said nothing, asked nothing. She just watched. The SUV door opened. The first man to step out was tall, with a straight back and a uniform pressed so sharply it looked like it had never been worn. A row of medals glinted across his chest in the golden afternoon light. Behind him stood 2 younger soldiers, one on each side. They said nothing, no extra movements, no wasted steps, just silence and discipline. And then, the bell on the diner door rang. That same soft chime Isaiah had triggered each afternoon. But today the sound sliced through the room like a quiet blade. The man in uniform stepped inside, eyes slowly scanning the space. No one spoke. An older gentleman set down his coffee cup as though remembering something sacred. The officer stopped in the center of the room, looked straight at Maggie. His voice was low, clear, but not harsh. "I'm looking for a woman who works here. They say her name is Maggie." Maggie nodded, startled but composed. "I'm Maggie." The man stepped forward. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a large manila envelope, marked with an official red stamp and the words, "To be delivered by hand." He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "I came about a boy who used to sit here." He pointed to table 3. The chair was still empty, the bowl of soup still untouched, and the fading sunlight still poured onto the table, as if nothing had changed. Maggie stood behind the counter, hands clenched softly, around the edge of her apron. Her eyes fixed on the envelope in the officer's hand. He paused, not out of hesitation, but as though choosing his words with care. "I apologize for the unannounced visit," he said gently. "We've passed through 6 towns to find this place. We were told that a boy had been coming here every afternoon for several weeks." Maggie didn't answer immediately. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes softening, like she'd just heard the first notes of an old song she hadn't played in years. The officer glanced again toward table 3. He came alone, never ordered food, just read his book, drank water, until someone started placing a bowl of soup at that table. Maggie let out a slow breath. Her eyes dropped to the countertop, then lifted again. "I never knew his name," she said, voice low. "He never said, I never asked." The officer nodded slowly, as if that was exactly the confirmation he'd hoped for. That, he said, was the one thing he mentioned. That there was a woman who didn't ask, who didn't need a reason, who never made him feel ashamed. Maggie swallowed hard, her posture straight, her lips pressed tight. In that moment, no one in the diner touched their forks. No one moved. The room held its breath. The man opened the envelope and pulled out a folded piece of paper, edges worn, blue ink slightly smeared in the corners. "This is a copy of one of the notes the boy left inside his book. We only found a few that were legible." He passed it gently across the counter. Maggie took it, carefully, like handling something sacred that could crumble under the weight of air. The writing was faint but unmistakable. "She never asked. The soup was always warm. If I have to leave, I hope she doesn't think I was ungrateful." Maggie pressed her lips together, her eyes now glassy. The stillness in her face shifted, not with drama, but with depth. The officer placed the envelope on the counter. Then, with a small but purposeful motion, straightened his posture. A small gesture, but solemn, like he was about to do the most important thing he would do all day. The diner was utterly still. No clinking spoons, no radio playing in the background, only the faint whisper of wind moving past the awning, and the sunlight resting on the metals across his chest, shimmering like drops of memory. The officer looked directly into Maggie's eyes. The officer's voice was calm and unwavering. "The boy's name is Isaiah Carter, son of Sergeant Marcus Carter, 173rd Airborne Brigade, United States Army National Guard." Maggie stood still. She didn't recognize the name, but when he said, "a boy who used to sit here," something in her heart had already known. Colonel Brooks paused, took in a slow breath, and continued with quiet precision. "Sergeant Carter was deployed to Afghanistan earlier this summer. He was part of a mission supporting local forces in the Kunar province, one of the most dangerous zones at that time. During a firefight in the Korangal Valley, he was killed while covering his unit's retreat. He was the last man out, and never made it back." The diner fell silent. It was as if the words Kunar, Korangal, and retreat had left behind a space too sacred to fill. Colonel Brooks opened the envelope and took out a letter, laminated for protection. The paper was yellowed with age, but the handwriting remained crisp, the final words of a man who never returned home. But before reading it, he added something else, a detail that in truth was the key to it all. "When we were gathering Sergeant Carter's belongings, among the few personal items he kept close was a small bundle of handwritten letters from Isaiah. We believe Isaiah sent them through a military support channel for families. No return address, no full names, but each one started the same way." Colonel Brooks pulled out a photocopy of one of the letters. The top of the page read, in shaky, childlike print, "I'm okay. There's a lady here who doesn't know my name, but she always leaves soup for me. She never asks anything." Then the colonel unfolded the letter from Sergeant Carter, written shortly after he'd received that very note. His voice was steady but heavy with weight. "If I don't make it back, please find the woman who's been feeding my son, the one who doesn't know his name, the one who never asked questions, but gave him something I hadn't yet managed to, a sense of safety that didn't need explaining. If there's any way to thank her, please do. Because of her, my son didn't get completely lost in this world when I couldn't return." Maggie stood frozen, the letter still in her hands. She didn't cry, but inside her, the room felt like it had gone still, like time itself had paused. And then, Without invitation, the past returned. Many years earlier, in the small kitchen of the house she still lived in, her husband Walter had sat at the table, wearing a worn-out military sweater, hands curled around a steaming mug of tea. He'd just come home from training, thinner than usual, but with that familiar glint in his eyes. Maggie had been cooking dinner. The kitchen smelled of onion and broth. On the table sat a single piece of toasted bread, Walter's favorite. But he didn't eat it. He wrapped it carefully in a napkin and tucked it into his coat pocket. "Who's that for?" Maggie had asked playfully. Walter chuckled softly, staring out the window fogged by the cold. His voice was rough from mountain wind. "There was a kid at the bus stop last night. He didn't ask for anything. But I saw it in his eyes, the same look I used to have when I was small. Not hunger exactly, but the kind of look that comes from being overlooked too many times." He stood, holding the wrapped bread. "Maggie, real kindness doesn't need to know your name. It just needs to know that, for today, someone gets to keep going." Those words had stayed with her all these years. Each time she served Isaiah a bowl of soup, each time he kept his head down, she saw her husband's eyes in that boy. Not because he was pitiful, but because he was used to no one ever asking, "Are you okay?" Maggie couldn't take her eyes off the paper in her hands. She didn't know what she felt. Grief, relief, or something deeper than either. And when Colonel Brooks finished reading, no one said a word. The diner was silent, as if the room itself had bowed its head for something too sacred to speak aloud. Colonel Brooks paused, then continued. This time his voice was lower, gentler. "Isaiah is now living with his grandparents in Colorado. They took him in after we were able to confirm his identity and story. It's taken him time to open up, but from his old letters, we learned something important. He felt safe here, at this little table, in this quiet diner, and that made his healing a little easier." Maggie closed her eyes, just for a moment. She took in a long, slow breath, not from sorrow, but from something deep within her finally being set down. In that sacred silence, Colonel Brooks stood tall. He raised his hand in a formal military salute, crisp, full, and unwavering, as if he were addressing a superior officer. Behind him, the other soldiers, both inside and outside the vehicles, followed suit. A synchronized gesture of honor and respect. A woman who made soup in a small-town diner, a nameless boy, a father who never returned, and an act of kindness that asked for nothing. In that moment, the ordinary brushed up against the divine. The soldiers stayed no longer than 30 minutes, no cameras, no press, just a group of men in uniform who came in silently and left even more quietly. But the trace they left behind, no one in town would forget. The diner was busier than usual the next morning. No one said anything, but everyone felt it. Something had changed. Not on the walls, but in the hearts of those inside. One elderly man, a regular who always came in for black coffee, arrived early, stood still for a long time in front of table 3. He didn't sit, didn't speak, just took off his cap and bowed his head. Later, a young mother walked by the diner with her son. He tugged her hand and asked, "Aren't we eating here today?" She smiled gently and replied, "We'll come back tomorrow. But today, that seat belongs to someone else." The table that once was the quietest in the diner had become the quietest place in the whole town. 1 week later, Henry, the town's old carpenter, known more for his grumbles than his grace, pushed through the door holding something in his hands, a small wooden plaque, hand-carved, dark brown, simple, smooth, honest. He didn't speak, just handed it to Maggie and looked toward table 3. The plaque read, "Table 3, for those who've waited on someone who might not return," and below, in smaller letters, "In memory of Sergeant Marcus Carter and the Quiet Sons of America." Maggie didn't nod, didn't say thank you. She just walked over and set the plaque down as quietly as she'd once set down a bowl of soup. Gradually, people began leaving little things at the table. A mother placed a photo of her son in uniform with a handwritten note. He used to sit quiet, just like Isaiah. An elderly woman tucked a hand-embroidered handkerchief inside a paper bag, labeled in purple ink, "For the one who keeps hearts warm." Someone left an envelope under a plate of cookies. Inside, a $100 bill, and a note that simply read, "Don't stop making soup. whoever it's for. Behind the counter, the dark green knit cap, the one Maggie had left for Isaiah on a rainy day, still hung in the same spot. No dust. No one touched it. Every afternoon, Maggie would glance at it, just for a second, as if checking whether someone might return today. One day a boy asked, "Whose hat is that?" Maggie smiled softly, bent down to meet his eyes. It belonged to someone who knew exactly when to wear it. Every afternoon, right at 3:40 p.m., Maggie would ladle out a fresh bowl of soup. She'd place it gently on table 3. No one touched it, but not once did it sit long enough to grow cold. When customers asked, "You still waiting for that boy?" Maggie would answer, her voice softer than the clink of a spoon, "I'm not waiting, but I'm always ready." From time to time, someone else would sit there, a retired man with an old wedding ring, quietly sipping tea across from the plaque, a teenage boy new to town doing his homework, nervous eyes but sitting straight, a young woman clutching job applications, head resting on the table for a moment, then getting up with a quiet smile. No one ever took anything, but everyone left something behind. A little courage, a deeper breath, a moment of stillness. Almost a year to the day since those 4 black SUVs had pulled up, Maggie opened the diner like always. She arrived early, wiped down table 3 with her familiar pot, stirred a new pot of barley soup on the stove. Outside, snow was falling in slow flakes, fine and white, like powdered sugar drifting from an invisible hand. She stepped out to grab a menu from the counter. That's when she saw it. Sitting neatly beside the order pad was a military challenge coin, slightly larger than a silver dollar, cast in dark bronze. One side bore the emblem of the 173rd Airborne Brigade, Sergeant Carter's unit. The other side had a hand-engraved phrase, small but bold, "Semper Memor," always remember. Tucked beneath the coin was a folded note, no envelope, no signature, but the handwriting was unmistakable, slanted, shaky, young. "Dear Miss Maggie, I'm learning how to bake cookies like yours. Grandma says I'm clumsy, but I'm trying. Today I had to write an essay called My Hero, but I didn't write about Dad. Dad was a great soldier, I know that, but a hero is someone who keeps you warm when Dad can't. I remember the soup. I remember the green hat. I remember how you never asked why. Someday I want to be the person who sets the bowl down for someone else. I don't know if saying thank you is enough, but I remember. I always will." Maggie didn't frame the note, didn't lock the coin in a case. She simply placed the coin on table 3, beside the wooden plaque. Her fingers rested on the cool surface for a second, a chill like the breath of memory. Then she returned to the kitchen. The soup was simmering. The bowl was waiting. The napkin was folded. And outside, the wind kept blowing toward the same distant hill, where Walter had once stood, where kindness was cooked each evening by hand, with no names. That evening, after closing up and shutting down the lights, Maggie paused in front of table 3. The coin was still there, resting beside the plaque and the carefully folded napkin, as if it had always belonged to that spot. She didn't touch it, just stood quietly for a moment. Then she gave a slow nod and stepped out, leaving behind a space where kindness had once been given freely. No name, no thanks, just love. She thought of Isaiah, now growing up with his grandparents in Colorado, carrying the memory of his father, and she hoped, carrying the belief that even in the darkest times, kindness can still find you in the places you least expect. Not everyone who helps needs to be honored. Sometimes all it takes is this, that today, someone is no longer hungry, and that is enough to change a life. If you've ever witnessed a quiet act of kindness or been on the receiving end of one, leave a 1 in the comments. Who knows? Your story might inspire someone tomorrow. You might forget this story in a few days, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to No See Stories, where we tell the small stories that can move hearts, where justice, kindness, and memory always have a place to live on.